previous lessons, we've discussed our basic setup for nymph fly fishing. I use this setup a good portion of my time with great success, and it's easy to set up and get out on the water. But when I'm fishing for quantity or quality, I'll typically switch my rig for the water that I'm fly fishing. Now these techniques are more technical than the basic 2-fly setup, so when you first try them, don't get too frustrated. They're more challenging to maneuver. Now the first set of water I wanted to discuss where you can find a large abundance of trout and find ones that you can write home about are called tailwaters. As your fly fishing skills progress, you'll be more in tune with scouting out trout, and you'll be able to find ones that are for sight fishing. Now tailwaters are fantastic areas for these, as the water is typically clear throughout the year and some of the more massive beasts are easily slided from a distance. When nymphing tailwaters, I'll typically change up my rig to be more stealthy. This includes a much longer leader and multiple nymph setups. We also change out weights to accommodate the flow of the water and the depth. The first rig setup I want to talk about is the 90-degree rig. This rig is a modification from Ridgeway, Colorado guide Matt McCannell, who regularly finds trophy trouts for his clients on the Padre River. The tanks in this tailwater typically will only show themselves once or twice a day, and if they get a glimpse of you, they are gone. They are also very skittish to the fly line, so increased leader length is a must. To start constructing this rig, we're going to start with 2 feet to 15 feet of 0x or 1x leader. Now this will depend on how close you think you can get to that particular trout. The longer you go with this leader, the harder it's going to be to cast, but at the same time you might need that extra 15 feet to get to that particular tank without spooking them in the slightest. If you're building out your own leader, you can use 40-pound mono. Number 2, we're going to use a clear bobber indicator with a perfection loop. What you're going to do is you're going to make that perfection loop and you're going to feed your bobber through it so you can move on that perfection loop. Then we're going to add a number 14 swivel, and off of that swivel we're going to attach 6 to 7 feet of 6x or 5x tippet. That's going to go down to your first fly, and we're going to tie the first fly on with an improved clinch knot. We're going to add split shot about 12 to 16 inches above that first fly, and we're going to add split shot as needed depending on the depth of the water and the speed of the water. As we've shown in previous videos, the fish are going to be sitting about 1 foot from the bottom of the river feeding. Add more weight as needed to get your fly down fast enough into that column of where they're feeding. Next, we're going to add 12 to 14 inches of 5x or 6x tippet to your next fly. The next fly we're going to tie on with a non-slip loop knot so it has a little bit more movement in the water column. I've started using this setup exclusively when sight hunting for monster trout, and I found it to be hugely successful. The key to this setup is that the line at the bobber makes a 90-degree turn when the flies hit the water. They swing down like a hinge at a 90-degree door, dropping the fly right in the front of the trout. Placement of the fly is vital to give it time to swing down in front of the monster before you can get the take. So when you're casting to our particular target, before you even get close, make sure that you've approached from behind and below the fish so not to spook them. Also make sure that you have all the line out that you're going to need to make one single cast to your target. Typically, you're going to want your flies to land about 10 to 15 feet above the trout, so the hinge and the leader has enough time for the flies to swing down into the feeding zone. Now, you're going to have to play with this timing as water currents will change your presentation. In faster water, you're going to have to cast up a little bit higher. So on the downside of this rig, because you have less fly line out, it takes a little while to get used to, especially to cast. Because you don't have that additional fly line out, it's actually a lighter field to try to cast, so it makes it a little more difficult. Now before you go out and spook that once-in-a-lifetime catch, make sure that you've mastered the casting of this rig in multiple environments. Do it in wind, do a long cast, do a short cast. You might only get one excellent cast to present to that large trout. This rig is fantastic, and you're going to find yourself catching larger trout as soon as you get accustomed to it. I'll typically fish this rig in water that's no deeper than 7 to 10 feet. Now for tailwaters like the Green River, where you can have deep pockets over 20 feet deep, I'm going to change up my presentation and I'm going to change up my rig. I will change up my fly fishing rig to a drop shot rig setup. This is an excellent setup if you're fishing deep pools or runs where you want to have multiple flies in different levels of the water column. This is also great for fishing dirty water because this setup and techniques are deadly during that time of the year. You can fish as many flies as your heart desires, but make sure you check it with your local fishing laws to make sure you're not breaking any rules. This can be fished with an indicator or tight line, like a Euro nymph type of setup. We're going to start out by using an either 8-foot or 9-foot leader, 4x or 5x, sometimes even longer depending on the depth of the water that we're fishing. The idea is to combine enough line so the split shot is bouncing off the bottom as the fly rides above it. So you're fishing in 20 feet of water, give yourself a 12-foot leader and another 6 feet of droppers. We're going to start with our clear indicator. We're going to put our weight at the very, very bottom, or the lead. We're going to use a triple surgeon's knot with the tag end as a fly connection. You can also build an overhand knot and connect with the dropper loop. An overhead knot connecting the fly with the dropper loop, overhead knot connect fly with the dropper loop, and continue as needed. Now keep flies about 8 to 12 inches apart. You get any tighter than that, you're going to have some hookups in not only the face, but then probably in the tail as well. Now when fly fishing this setup, it's best to keep as much of your fly line out of the water as possible. That doesn't mean your leader, that doesn't mean your tip, it's the fly line. The idea here is to have a tight connection from your rod tip to the weight bouncing along the bottom. This way, when you have a take from a fish, you can quickly set the hook and bring that bad boy home. So also remember to use a darker or dull colored flies at the bottom and make your top flies lighter as you go up the water column. These are going to be the natural forms of flies as they move up through that water column, so closer to the sun, the brighter they're going to look. Be careful casting this rig because every dropper that you're going to add on, you have a higher percentage of getting a complete rat's nest out of your leader. I typically do a water load cast with this, as this straightens out the entire line and loads your rod with enough energy to make an elongated loop for your next feeding zone. It also eliminates any false casts that you might be doing. Nymphing is visualizing. The age-old battle for nymph fly fishing has been that it's boring and that we're nothing more than mindless bobber lobbers. Now I completely disagree with this, as it takes more mental foresight to visualize what you cannot see than it is to cast to a rising pool of trout. As a fly fisher, you need to visualize the current, water depth, your surroundings. You gotta factor all these things into how we're gonna set up our rig and how we're gonna fish a particular stretch of water. Now we've discussed how to read water, but you might be wondering how can I break down a section and prepare my rigs, flies, and presentation to that particular stretch of water. Let's break down this section of pocket water. As you look at this section of water, we have multiple diverging currents, and if we're gonna cast and let the indicator pull our flies through this zone, we'll be pulling our presentation all over the place. This section will be best presented casting behind the rock into the soft pocket and letting the flies get into the strike zone as it slowly moves out of the pocket. Now, if you're targeting a trout and the seams are on the front of the rock, move as close as possible to that location. You're going to want to be able to lift your indicator above the divergence and let your flies float through it naturally. You might be asking, but how do I know if I have a hit if my indicator is out of the water? This is when you're going to need to focus on the line, the bobber, the water action. Now if you see any movement or pause in any of those three areas, that's when you set the hook. Shelf drop-offs. This is a typical deep run that on busy stretches of water you're most likely going to find 4 or 5 anglers in. But today we're lucky and we can fish it. What I want to show you here is how this one rock formation creates a unique shelf that is an excellent location for shelter and food. But this is well over 15 feet deep, so how are we going to get our rig down to the feeding zone to catch one trout? This is where you need to visualize the run and say to yourself, yes, I need 5 more feet of tippet and about 4 more weights to get my flies down to the trout. This visualization takes time, but the more you fly fish, the better you're going to get at reading the water and judging depth. If you're in a super fishy run and you're not getting any takes, add more weight. You're most likely riding above the strike zone. Always be thinking about depth and current and when you're approaching any section of water. If the water is slow, you might not need to add any weight to get into the strike zone. If the section is fast, you might need to add more. There's always going to be a battle with drag and weight that you need to consider when approaching water. Ripple magic. One of the most impressive areas that I see fly fishers pass right up is the ripple zones. Now trout need oxygen, and during warmer times of the year, they move to these zones for increased oxygen levels and greater lies for food. When the sun is setting, or what I like to call the hour of power, the larger trout will migrate out of their holding areas into these zones for nighttime hatches. Let's break down this section of water. Even though it's turbulent, there are micro seams running throughout. Trout are going to be sitting in these micro seams and eating. Now look for this when you're nymphing throughout the day, especially in the early morning and late evening. Now if you're not sure how to pick out this section of water, start by grid casting. What we do with that is we start low in the bottom left hand corner, and we're going to work our way up a foot, then move over a foot and do the same thing. Continue this until you have covered the entire section. Now I'll typically do 2 to 3 casts per section. Now if you have no luck, move up 10 yards and continue the process. Now if you hook into one, remember that spot, as you most likely picked off the smallest trout in that seam. Now trout have a particular pecking order. The largest will get the most optimal feeding line, and the others get the leftovers. The head hen will be sitting most likely at the highest spot of that run, where she gets the first dibs on all food. Now if you didn't get a chance to review how to read water, check out our beginner video on the subject. And also, if you didn't have the opportunity to learn how to stalk large trout, check out our previous video. Strike, strike, strike. So we don't want to waste time to strike. As soon as the indicator gives you a sign, the trout is at your nymph. You need to set the hook immediately. You can't afford to wait long or you're going to miss that fish. At the first light pull, you need to be ready to strike, which means that you should keep your position as you watch your indicator. However, striking fast doesn't mean striking hard, as we'll discuss in the next point. Strike immediately, but lightly. Striking fast doesn't have to involve your entire body strength. When you're nymph fly fishing, it's best to keep your strike as light as possible, otherwise you're at risk of tensing up, resulting in slowing down your reactions. Additionally, a strong strike might rip the fly entirely out of the fish's mouth, leaving you empty-handed. Now you have to remember that the trout can be extremely light and gentle when they bite at that nymph. Keeping things as light as possible will give you the best chances not to miss the fish. Besides, in the event when your strike comes too late, a light strike keeps your nymph underwater and in the feeding zone. When in doubt, always strike. It's not always easy to tell the difference between the nymph catching on a rock and the light take of a trout on the fly. While keeping your eyes on the indicator can let you see the sign, the indicator doesn't know how to differentiate from a rock or a fish. Ideally, you're going to want to strike when the indicator either goes up, it stalls out, or it even does a slight movement. Whether it's going to be lightly or violently, that's when you want to strike. Striking gently every time means you're less likely that you're going to miss the trout. And as I've mentioned in earlier videos, take things slow. Take everything from the approach to the water to where you're going to cast to your actual cast in a calm and collected manner. When you're hunting for large trout, you might only get 1 or 2 shots at them before they disappear, and you might not get another chance at them for another day. Your heart's going to be racing, your muscles are going to feel shot, but stay calm. Focus on the one perfect cast, and everything else will come together.